All right, so GLM 5.2 just dropped and it's already putting real pressure on GLM 4.5. It scored 58.4 on SWE Bench Pro, which puts it above GPT 5.4 and Claude Opus 4.6 on that leaderboard. GLM 5.2 launched June 13, 2026, so this is as fresh as it gets. I'm comparing GLM 4.5 versus GLM 5.2 across 4 real tests, pulling from vendor docs, artificial analysis, and deep infra benchmarks, no vendor money, no cherry picking. And honestly, what surprised me most was one specific spec that could completely break your workflow if you pick the wrong model. And it's not the one most people are talking about. So this comparison is for developers and teams picking a GLM model right now, whether that's for API work, agentic coding pipelines, or long context document tasks. A bad pick doesn't just mean slower outputs. You could hit a hard context wall mid-session or pay more per token than you need to. And that's a real cost that compounds fast. Test 1 is language reasoning accuracy. And when this goes wrong, it's not subtle. You get a model that confidently writes broken code or steps through a math problem and lands on a wrong answer with zero hesitation. And then you spend 20 minutes debugging something the model caused. That wasted time compounds fast across a whole team. I looked at what's actually published here, and I have to be straight with you. GLM 4.5 has no independently verified reasoning benchmark scores. None. GLM 5.2 inherits its GLM 5.1 baseline, which is 95.3 on IME 2026 and 58.4 on SWE Bench Pro. But bear in mind, those come from the GLM 5.1 baseline, not a fresh GLM 5.2 run. GLM 5.2 launched without official benchmarks, so we're borrowing scores from its predecessor, and GLM 4.5 might actually perform well on reasoning tasks. We just don't have the published numbers to know. The gap could be smaller than it looks on paper, so take it with a grain of salt. Okay, so I was expecting this to be closer, but with GLM 4.5 posting 0 published reasoning scores, and GLM 5.2 sitting above GPT 5.4 on SWE Bench Pro, GLM 5.2 takes test 1, the reasoning mode flexibility alone with tool invocation mid-thinking gives it a real edge. So that puts us at GLM 5.21, GLM 4. 5.0, test 2 is multilingual support quality. And when a model drops the ball here, it's not just awkward phrasing. You get customer-facing outputs in Japanese or Spanish that sound machine translated. Your users notice immediately, and if you're shipping to East Asian markets or any non-English audience, a bad multilingual model is a support ticket waiting to happen. What surprised me here is how thin the data actually is. Neither GLM 4.5 nor GLM 5.2 has a published multilingual benchmark score. GLM 5.2 press coverage calls out strong East Asian language support, but there's no number behind that claim. And GLM 4.5 is documented on 15 trillion training tokens with 0 language breakdown. An earlier model, GLM 4 Plus, is documented at 26 languages, including Russian, Spanish, and German. But that's a different generation entirely, and we can't just apply that number to GLM 4.5 or GLM 5.2. Both come from the same team with Chinese and English as primary languages, so they're probably pretty close on multilingual quality, but honestly, I can't prove it. Now, I was expecting one of these to pull ahead on multilingual, but the data just isn't there to call it either way. So this one's a tie, and I think that's the honest answer. No benchmark scores for either side means no winner, and the scoreboard stays at GLM 5.21, GLM 4.50 with one test tied. Test 3 is API response latency, and this one has a very direct cost. When your app is literally hammering an API endpoint and the first token takes 10 seconds, users bounce, or your agentic pipeline stalls waiting on a response, and the whole workflow slows down. Slow TTFT is a product quality problem that shows up in retention. What I found here is pretty lopsided. GLM 5.2 is benchmarked across 17 API providers with a best TTFT of 4.45 seconds at Bastin and a top throughput of 578 tokens per second. GLM 4.5 has 0 published latency data, none. And I'd rather call that what it is than pretend we can compare them fairly. There's a real caveat worth knowing though. GLM 5.2's 17 providers have a 987% speed spread across the range. So the 578 tokens per second figure is best case, not average. And if you land on a slower provider, your experience is going to look very different. Provider selection on GLM 5.2 matters a lot more than the headline number suggests. Honestly, I was expecting GLM 4.5 to at least have some published throughput numbers, but there's nothing. GLM 5.2 takes test 3 by default, and that's not unfair because having 17 benchmark providers and pricing as low as 59 cents per million tokens is a real deployment advantage, which brings us to GLM 5.22, GLM 4.50 with one tied. Test 4 is context window handling, and this is the one that actually breaks your workflow in a very specific, painful way. You're feeding a large code base into your agent, and at 128,000 tokens, the model just cuts off, loses earlier context, starts hallucinating about files it can't see anymore, and your agent starts making decisions based on incomplete information. This is the most clear-cut result in the whole comparison. GLM 4.5 tops out at 128,000 input tokens, and GLM 5.2 goes up to 1 million tokens, which is nearly 8 times larger. Output ceiling is 131,072 tokens on GLM 5.2 versus 96,000 on GLM 4.5, and GLM 5.2 ships with 8 pre-integrated coding agents, including Claude Code, Klein, and Rue Code. So I was expecting context to matter, but not this much. The 8 times gap between 128,000 and 1 million tokens is the single most decisive spec in this whole comparison. And GLM 5.2 wins test 4 clearly, which wraps the scoreboard at GLM 5. 2-3 GLM 4.50 with 1 tied, and this context result is really what drives the final call. So here's where GLM 4.5 actually holds up. It runs 32 billion active parameters versus GLM 5.2's 40 billion, which means lower self-hosted inference costs per token if you're running it yourself. And its 128,000 context is plenty for most single document tasks. GLM 4.5's vendor documentation is also more detailed and stable right now because GLM 5.2 launched with no official benchmarks. So GLM 4.5 is the safer known quantity, and GLM 5.2 is just in a different category on a few things. The 1 million token context is the only real option for whole codebase ingestion or long agentic sessions. It's available across 17 benchmark providers with pricing starting at 59 cents per million tokens. It inherits a Sweetie Bench Pro score of 58.4 sitting above GPT-5. 4 on the leaderboard and 8 pre-integrated coding agents make it genuinely plug and play. Honestly, I was expecting this to be a closer call, but the context window gap made it pretty clear. If your workflows top out at 128,000 tokens and you want stable, well-documented vendor specs with lower self-hosted cost, GLM 4. 5 is your pick. If you need whole code base ingestion, multi-provider deployment flexibility, or pre-built coding agent integrations, GLM 5.2 is the one.